back then when that cartoon first came
It
out,
just meant like, hey, dude,
we're having a happy old time.
having fun.
Here in 2023, it's like, whoa, we're going to do what? And we are back once again. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another episode of the Identity Christ Is podcast, where we endeavor to give an answer for the hope that lies within us, yet doing so with gentleness and respect. I am your co-host, Jaylen Thompson.
Dylan Schweitzer.
Dill, what's the word, bro? How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I got married recently.
Oh, my
Got the ring.
man. And I got to say, the wedding was beautiful. I was there, of course, but the wedding was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful experience. It was different, different from what I'm accustomed to because of the Catholic piece of it.
Sure.
That some of those sacraments and traditions that took place during the ceremony. That was different, and I enjoyed it. It was.
And then you got like the
different.
Hispanic elements too, with like the lasso and the coins and stuff.
That was cool. That was cool.
Yeah, very cool.
So,
And I made it Facebook official, so now I can finally say I'm actually married. Because
Yes.
if it's not on the book, not on the gram, I mean, what are you doing?
Got a point. But yeah, beautiful. I wanted to I was going to bring it up, but you beat me to it. So
beat you to it. So speaking of love.
Oh, man.
I have a lovely topic for us today.
Which is?
Love.
Oh.
So in our modern world today, we use this word love a lot. Mm-hmm. I love this slice of pizza or food or something like that. Mm-hmm. Or sometimes you get the girl with the Valley accent saying, I just love, things like that. And the term is just thrown around so much.
Yeah.
I love the bowls. I love deep dish pizza.
Yep.
Whatever it might be, the term is thrown around a lot. But it's used so much that I feel like it's kind of lost its meaning and what it's meant historically.
Sure.
And I thought that would be kind of a fun word or topic to kind of explore a little bit. Because I feel like there's this really stark contrast between how the Bible seems to present the word and how it's really used today. And I also think it makes it problematic for people when they try to learn about Christianity, or they try to learn about what the Bible, or even just read it and try to understand what it's saying. There's this giant hurdle because what we do is we bring our modern lens, our modern context and mindset to the Bible, and the Bible is very, very old.
Yeah.
And the way words were used back then were just different.
Great.
So there's this fancy term called etymology. It's just a fancy word meaning the evolution of words used. So for a very simple analogy, example, I should say, would be the word gay.
Yep.
So gay in like the 1920s, about 100 years ago, it would just mean I'm happy, glee, full of good cheer, right? Like what's that one song? It's like from a musical. It's I feel pretty and gay, and that was just like a normal thing to throw in a musical.
You ever seen the cartoon The Flintstones?
Yeah.
Yeah, they in their theme song at the end of it, they say we'll have a gay old time.
That's right.
And back then when that cartoon first came out,
it just meant like, hey, dude,
we're having a happy old time.
Having fun.
Here in 2023, it's like, whoa, we're gonna do what?
Right.
So
having a gay old time.
Well, right, but here in 2023, like that's you know what I mean, like
featuring Lil Nas X.
Okay, we can't do this episode. We cannot do this. Go ahead.
Anyways,
we can't do this episode.
Obviously how the term is used today is a little bit different.
Facts.
It's usually someone expressing that they have a sexual preference of the same sex.
Yes.
So obviously that word is taking a dramatic turn in just 100, or Flintstones is like the 50s, right? 60s?
Something like that.
I mean, so anywhere from 100 to just 50 years, that word has turned dramatically.
Yep.
So think about words that were used 500, 1,000, or maybe even 3,000 years ago.
Right.
Where the biblical texts, the newest ones, I say with harsh quotations, are going to be in the first century. Still 2,000 years old. Some of the oldest ones are going to date back maybe as old as 3,500 to 2,800, depending on where we put the historical marker. Either way, pretty old. And so I want to kind of dive into how the word is used in general. So if you just type in on the old Google machine love, it's when it's expressed as a noun, it's just an intense feeling of deep affection. You know, if love is used as a verb, it's to feel deep affection for someone or something. So it's right away attached to our psychology.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say, like, can we like hang here for a second and talk about this a little bit?
That's why we're here.
What do you think about that definition of the word love? An intense feeling of deep affection.
Well, I find it to be very problematic.
Okay.
Because that means if I don't have an intense feeling of affection for someone or something, I don't love it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if I say I love my mom, but let's say I'm a teenager and she grounds me or something, oftentimes we say I hate my mom. Like, oh no, I still love my mom. But like the way that it's typically used is expressing an intense feeling of deep affection. Where when we look at it historically used, it's used a lot differently. It's not really talking necessarily about our psychology.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I get what you're saying. I guess when I think about this definition, this would explain why our romantic relationship status here in this country is where it is right now.
Sure.
What I mean by that is we have people not getting married as much as we probably need for society to flourish. And the ones who are married, if we base love on this definition, we see why our divorce rate is near 50%.
Yeah.
Because if this is what love is, an intense feeling of deep affection, like you just said, what happens when that feeling is no longer intense? Or what happens when that intense feeling is no longer affection? It's a very Greco-Roman type of ideal as it relates to love. It's very feeling based, kind of almost kind of uncontrolled passion based definition.
Yeah.
You know, you say stuff like you can't help who you love and stuff like that. You know,
right.
I'm falling in love with you.
Sure.
Yeah.
I caught feelings.
Yeah, I caught feelings.
That's the newest one.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I caught feelings. All that kind of
they
stuff.
They don't have a booster for that one yet.
I guess not, right? And so it's you know, if that's the definition that we're gonna use, then that explains some of the results that we're currently seeing in our society as it relates to romantic relationships, even friendships for that matter.
Yeah.
If this is the definition that we're using, no wonder you're seeing all these friendships fall apart left and right, because once this feeling has left the relationship or left one person in the relationship, there's nothing else to do other than leave and go chase that feeling somewhere else.
Yeah.
Or
absolutely.
to someone else.
Yeah. So I think kind of juxtaposing that sort of modern view of love is really helpful to kind of see where we're at.
Yep.
But kind of going back in history into our time machine a little bit and trying to look at how the word was typically used back then.
Let's do it.
And so there's actually, I think, 7 or 8 Greek words for love or used in place of that.
Yep.
I got 4 here I thought would be fun to share. The first one is eros or eros. I don't know how Greek pronunciation is supposed to work, so we'll say it very English here, eros.
That works.
It's physical love or sexual desire. It's a type of love that involves passion, lust, or romance.
Which we oftentimes confuse for love, the biblical love that we're going to discuss.
Right, right.
We oftentimes confuse those two. Which is why, just quick side note, that's why you probably shouldn't jump into bed with somebody that you're dating so quickly, because you'll confuse your eros for perhaps agape or agape. Yeah, that's probably what you probably confuse it with. So that's probably why it's good that you don't do that.
Or you're confusing your eros with the loss of blood in your head if you're a guy. So
yeah, that too.
Yeah. Wait a little bit.
Yeah, that'll happen.
Take a cold shower. Make a serious decision.
Right.
Another word for love that's used from the Greek language is philia. It's affectionate love. It's typically a type of love that involves friendship. Like I have philia for you, Jaylen. Absolutely. Yeah.
You my dog, bro.
Another popular one, this is the one that's most used in the New Testament specifically, is agape. It's often defined and derivative of unconditional and or sacrificial love.
Yes. And that is the one that we confuse our eros with.
Exactly.
More times than not when you jump in the bed too quickly.
And then 2 other fun ones I thought would be fun to share, and then we'll kind of go into the 2 primary ones in a moment here. A storge is familial love. So it's the natural love that I have for family members, or that we have for one another in our family and stuff like that. And then this one's fun. It's mania. It's obsessive love. This one's a little scary.
Mania.
It's the kind of love that a stalker feels toward their victim.
Yeah, a maniac feels toward their victim.
Yeah, right. I just saw that one. I was like, yeah, I had to share that. That's pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and it just reminds me that our English language is so small compared to some of these other languages, like in German or Greek. Like it's just so much bigger. There's so much more color to use when you're talking. You could paint a bigger picture with some of these ancient languages, which is part of the reason why maybe we just use love so interchangeably or in different ways today too. I digress. So the two primary ones that are used in the New Testament are philia and agape. So again, philia is that sort of friendship love, the love you might have for a sort of platonic love. We might use that term today. So a friend for love for another friend, I should say. So there's some examples of this in the New Testament. So like when Christ is described as a friend of sinners in Matthew 11:19, philia was the original Greek word that was applied.
Right.
When the Lord called his disciples friends in Luke 12:4 or in John 15:13-15, philia was the word he used. And when James named Abraham the friend of God, he employed the term philia. And then, of course, in John 16:27, filio is used to describe the saints' love for the Lord Jesus, which springs from their joy in him.
So this type of love can be summed up in, well, I shouldn't say summed up in, but found also in the commandment to love our neighbors as ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's all I got on that.
Oh, I thought you were going to keep going. My apologies. So,
that's all I got.
Agape is the primary one that Christians usually talk about when they're talking about love. Again, it's that unconditional sort of sacrificial love.
Sure.
The most common example that people might refer to is John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but should have everlasting life. A good way that I like to use Greek words, or when I'm trying to understand texts in their ancient language, is to try to take a word and then replace it with the definition. So, for example, we could do that with agape here. So instead of for God so agape the world, I might say for God so had unconditional sacrificial love for the world that he gave his only begotten son. We could do the same thing where later in John 13:34-35, he says, a new commandment I give to you, that you unconditionally and sacrificially love one another as I have sacrificially and unconditionally loved you, that you should also unconditionally and sacrificially love one another. It gets a little wordy sometimes when you're doing it.
Right.
And then this last one we can kind of mentally kind of sneak in there. But God commends his love towards us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So that'd be a direct example of something that we didn't really earn, but it was something that was unconditionally given to us, and it was sacrificially given as well.
Correct. And that's fantastic. And I'm really glad that God's love is different from ours, because this relationship would have been over a long time ago.
Right. So, and I've been thinking a lot about, okay, what's like a simple way to kind of also sum up the term love and its practical use?
Yeah.
Because I could just use, heady definitions like, oh, it's sacrificial, it's unconditional, whatever that means.
Well, I got a definition.
What's that?
Well, it's more of like a. So tell me what you think of this one. I asked you what you thought about the first one we used from the Google machine. Tell me what you think about this definition. Love is the decision to consider the emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual well-being of someone else above yourself.
Beautiful.
That's it.
I'm just taking it in. I'm absorbing that agape. I'm just enjoying it.
Yeah.
No, that's great. I
didn't
hear.
Do you think that's a better definition than the first one we gave, an intense feeling of deep affection?
Yeah. It's certainly a better definition. I would definitely agree with that. One that I really like, it's basically the same concept, but in just a little less words. It's just love is willing the good of the other as other. I believe Thomas Aquinas said that. And it's in I Love Yours. It basically unpacks that in the different practical realms in which you might do that. And thinking about the primary categories of one's life and applying that. But love is willing the good of the other as other. So in that concept in general, I am not first. I'm thinking of the individual that is separate from me first, and trying to bring them the good as much as I can. And there's nothing in there that's related to it being a conditional. It's not love is willing the good of the other as long as they remember my birthday, or as long as they pay their part of the rent,
Right.
or as long as they don't cheat on me, or as long as they don't do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, agreed. And also, too, this type of love sounds like a more thoughtful, intentional, deliberate love, as opposed to the more Greco-Roman type of love where I just kind of fell for you and couldn't help myself. I couldn't control the feeling. I heard Voddie Baucham say in a sermon one time, talking about love. He said, "This feeling is bigger than the both of us." Right?
That's goofy.
But it's goofy. But that's how, if you think about it, that's kind of how we act as it relates to love, right? And when you compare, the definition we just discussed from Google to the one I just gave, the second one is far more deliberate, thoughtful, intentional, and it's far more to me it's far more valuable and meaningful too, because of that, because of the thoughtfulness and intention. You're not just flying by the seat of your pants or the seat of your emotions, but as it relates to this type of biblical love, it's very thought through, it's very considerate, and I find that love to be far more valuable and far more sustaining long term for the duration and longevity of a relationship than I do the intense feeling of deep affection. Because you just got married, Deal. Let's talk about this. You just got married. In your newlywed phase, there is the feeling of intense, deep affection, right? This new life together, we're building this new life and taking two and combining them two, becoming one flesh, all this great stuff. Right. And then something happens along the way, if I'm being honest. Something happens along the way. I've been married for almost 7 years now, where that intense feeling weakens.
Sure.
It's not intense anymore.
Right.
The affection isn't deep anymore. It may have its moments, but for the most part, it's not as deep as when we first started this whole thing.
Sure.
And the question becomes, if this is the definition of love, what do we do when this feeling goes away?
That's really interesting.
Right? That's where the I guess that's where the divorce comes in. but
for us.
No, not for us. But that's what that's what happens, right? Culturally, right? And in the society that we live in, that's what happens, right? The wedding bells are here, and we're all in love, and we're up there at the altar. Oh, I love you too. We're crying and giving these beautiful vows, and then the feeling.
Then life actually happens.
The life actually happens, and the feeling is gone, and all of a sudden, that which I said at the altar is exactly what I'm about to renege on.
It's interesting. I have a very different example that I feel like ties in with that pretty well.
Go for it.
So when someone goes to a mental hospital,
okay,
it's a terrible analogy to go right after marriage, but I promise I'll connect it, okay? When someone goes to like a mental hospital, whether they're suicidal or they're having extreme issues with addiction,
okay,
usually when they're in the hospital, they're able to stop suicidal ideation. Well, not usually, but the ones who are successful are able to stop suicidal ideation and stop their addictive behavior. But it's usually when they exit the facility is when things start getting hard. You might be able to come up with like a plan of attack and meetings with your counselor and everything, but all of a sudden when you're back at home and your old friends are hitting you up to go get high,
sure,
or you're back in your life and you're back with all of the triggers and anxiety and depression of your just regular life, it's hitting you again, you're right back at it. So you were in this sort of protective nest before.
Sure.
Kind of connecting that to the marriage where you're on the honeymoon, you're getting married and all these things. All these lovely things are going on. You're protected in a sense by the situation.
Sure.
But then 6 months down the road, life's just going to go back to where it was. And you don't really have that sort of bubble to kind of hide in. Things are going to happen.
Or you don't have that moment of intense emotion, which is what's going through your mind when you get married. It's an intense moment. It's an intense, affectionate moment, which it should be. It's a beautiful day, and it should be. You should be full of emotions. But the problem is, I think, is that when the emotions are all you have, up there.
Yeah, or it's at least primary.
Yeah, because while you're up there and you're as emotional as you are, you're up there making some pretty serious commitments.
Yeah.
And the commitments that you are making are based on the biblical definition of love, not the intense feeling of deep affection love.
Right.
And so I may be feeling this intense, deep affection up there at the altar, but the promises I'm making are based on a decision.
Exactly. Yeah.
To consider your well-being above my own. And then life happens, like you said, and my intense affection has subsided, has waned for whatever reason. But I still got these promises that I made based on the biblical definition.
Right.
Which makes no mistake about it. That's the one that God honors.
Right.
Right. You're saying your vows. He ain't thinking, oh, she's just up there being in her feelings. We'll talk about it later. Like, no, that's not what's going on. Right.
That's so funny.
So I think that, when that happens, that's where like we kind of disconnect with this whole love thing. That's where you get the idea of I fell out of love with you. Well, I bet you did.
Yeah. If by love you meant you don't have a great feeling anymore. Sure, I believe it.
Absolutely. And I think that's what we mean by, it just isn't working out between us. Or we just didn't work, or irreconcilable differences, whatever that means. Most differences are irreconcilable. You know what I mean? Right. Like they all are.
Like my wife is a vegetarian. I eat mostly meat. That is an irreconcilable difference.
Oh boy.
She keeps trying to sneak this fake meat into my food, trying to make me like it. The problem is it tastes pretty good. I'm like, dude, going against my own values of being animal based. But comedic example aside, I think it kind of highlights the differences between the modern and the biblical definition of the word love. And we can clearly see which one is more valuable, which one is more reliable, and which one you'd rather have. Would I rather have an intense feeling or something that's actually rooted in a deep commitment?
Yeah, and think about it. Like, what relationship is going to survive based off that first definition? Like, it doesn't even have to be romantic.
Right.
What friendship is going to survive off of that first definition? What brother, sister, sibling relationship is going to survive? What business relationship is going to survive? What relationship is going to survive on the intense feeling? I mean, just the fact that you said intense feeling, like what? Like, what relationship of any substance is going to survive off that first definition of love? None of them. You're going to be married 40 times by the time you retire. Like, it's silly, and it doesn't work. I think that's why we're observing the results that we see in society today. It's why we see it. Because this definition of love is trash.
Yeah,
it's absolute garbage. You can't build anything on this. It's quicksand. Quick as it goes up, it's coming back down.
Yeah, I think trying to move away from the concept of it being a psychological experience, but more so an action and an active decision that you make, I think is really a helpful way to start reading the Bible and understanding what they're getting at versus what the modern world is getting at.
Agreed.
It's interesting. Our pastor said one time, it was really a comedic example, but it was a good way to kind of think about it. He said, agape love is when me and my wife are fighting, but she says her feet hurts and I still rub her feet.
Yes.
So I'm not choosing to do this action out of some intense feeling, unless that intense feeling is like, anger or frustration, right? But he's choosing to do that for the one that he's committed his life to and has chosen to love, because she sees that she's in need and he wants to help even despite his feelings. And I think that's how we should act towards one another, with that sort of agape love. Despite how I feel right now, I want to will the good of you ahead of my own needs.
Yeah, and my current feelings have no bearing on my commitment to you, or my behavior towards you, and in light of my commitment to you.
Yeah. Now, one thing I would say, it's really easy to love those that are lovely.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
it's easy.
My wife's pretty easy to love. She is a beautiful, wonderful person inside and out.
Mine too.
But what we're called to do as Christians is something that is honestly impossible without Christ. It's not only to love those that are lovely, but to love those that are quite unlovely from our perspectives.
Oh boy, here we go.
It's, Christ often talks about loving our enemies in general.
Sure.
And so if I take the modern definition of that, it makes no sense. Like, for one, how could God command me to have an intense feeling for someone who I clearly don't like? That makes no sense.
None whatsoever.
I command you to have an intense feeling for your arch nemesis. It's like,
I don't feel it yet.
That's not going to happen.
Never.
You know what I mean?
Nope.
But when you start to unpack what agape actually means, it makes a lot more sense. I'm choosing you to will the good of the other person despite how you feel, which is actually a good thing. I don't have to feel great about the person that I'm trying to love necessarily.
And that's where it can become a commandment. Is when we're talking about the agape, the unconditional sacrificial.
Right.
That's when the Lord can say, I command you to love one another as I have loved you, or love your neighbors yourself, or love your enemies. It's because I'm commanding you to make the decision to unconditionally and sacrificially consider their well-being above yours.
And that's where I think
which really stinks.
Yeah, it's quite inconvenient.
Yes.
I don't do this stuff just because I think it's hip and popular. It's a pain in the butt a lot of the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's way easier to talk about it than to do it. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think the comedic example is just super helpful. It's like, yeah, I'm kind of peeved at my wife right now, but her feet hurt, and I don't really care how I feel right now. I'd rather make her feel better.
Sure.
Rub her feet. You know what I mean? But again, loving our enemies is something that I think is naturally impossible. I think it does take a sort of supernatural work within us, or a commitment to transcendent in general, to be able to do that. So, like, a couple things that Christ said on the Sermon on the Mount. He said, "You have heard as it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." Now, two interesting notes about this, just kind of a side note to this. The concept of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was something in the Old Testament that was actually a commandment. Now, part of the reason why that commandment was given is because when you think about the whole course of salvation history and how God was working through Israel and later the church, you have to kind of sometimes, and I don't mean this to degrade people who are of the Judaic faith still, but you kind of have to look at it as like teaching a kid to ride a bike. Like, you have to start with like training wheels, and then you have to kind of hold the bike seat and eventually let them go.
Right.
Where he said, I'm pretty sure later in this passage that he's quoting in the Old Testament, he's like, I'm giving you a lot of these things because your hearts are hard. You're not ready for these bigger supernatural truths and ethics to live by.
Sure.
Kind of paraphrasing.
Weightier matters.
And the other thing to consider is eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth is not a he's not talking about a literal eye and an eye. He's not saying if someone plucks out your eye, you should take their eye. And part of the reason we know this is because of how all of the Jews interpreted it throughout Judaic history, and how there's no documented case of someone literally plucking someone else's eye out.
Right.
So this was interpreted like, if someone does X punishment, you need to take them to the Old Testament court or the Levitical priesthood court and sort it out and get a just punishment and fine taken care of.
And the principle underlying that that ideal is doing unto others what you would have done to you.
Right. And so when Christ is talking about if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him also, it's not necessarily saying you should take a pacifist approach to if you were to get punched in the head. That's not what he's saying. The point is the context when he's drawing it back to the Old Testament there, he's trying to tell you if someone is like verbally slandering you and is taking down your reputation and your status in public, so doing something very verbally degrading, you should turn the other cheek to him. You shouldn't go blow for blow in that instance.
Yeah, we oftentimes use this verse to some people use it in support of Christian pacifism toward physical violence, but that's not what this verse is talking about.
Yeah, it's just not what he was getting at.
Yeah,
and that's not to say you can't be a pacifist and a Christian. It's just not what this verse is getting at.
Yeah, I just wanted to point that out because I know that
absolutely,
some people do that.
And so this is really hard to do. If someone's doing something absolutely terrible to me, an enemy for lack of better terms, doing something absolutely atrocious to me in public and stuff like that, I'm supposed to will the good of the other despite being the victim. And I hate using that term because it's just victim mentality is such like an epidemic in our society today. But I'm the victim of this crime, this social crime that's happening, and I am called to turn the other cheek and to love the individual, to will the good of the individual. That's insane.
Yes.
It is a crazy thing to uphold.
Yep.
It is a giant ethic to commit to loving our enemies. Another one, a couple other things he said on that Sermon on the Mount about the same subject of loving your enemies. If anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well.
Yep.
Again, this supernatural love of willing the other, of just trying, again, not doing blow for blow, because it's so easy to do that.
And it's also, it'll never end.
Yeah.
It'll never end, because there will always be, as long as you have human beings, there will be offense, right? And that's something we should all take in our relationships or relationship development, right? As long as you got two human beings who are trying to be their authentic selves, there's going to be offense.
Yeah.
If there's no offense, one of you is hiding something.
Right.
When somebody's not being themselves. And so, it'll be never ending if we go eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. We'll all be walking around here blind with no teeth.
Right.
Yeah, like it's just a flat out truth. Because we will always offend each other in some way, shape, or form, especially nowadays where it's so easy to offend somebody.
Yeah.
It'll just never end.
Right.
It won't go well. Nobody will win in that situation.
Absolutely. And I think the last big one from the Sermon on the Mount was, if you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies. And here's the big one. Pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. That's huge, for one. I'm supposed to pray for those who persecute me, so that I might be more like God. And so it was actually kind of a side note, like why we even have these commandments in general. They're not just like arbitrary rules to subjugate someone to be in a submissive position just because God can.
Yes.
God in his omniscience knows what is best for us.
And these commandments are for our benefit and for God's ultimate goal to mold us into the image of his son, Jesus.
Exactly.
That's it. To make us look more like him. Flat out.
Exactly. And later he says, he, referring to God, causes his sun to rise on evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous.
Yep.
So giving equal treatment to everyone. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And the tax collectors were viewed as like the worst people of the time, because they were Jews who were working with the Romans to get money from the Jews.
Uncle Tom's.
Uncle Tom's. So, I mean, if you love those who love you, what reward you get? Yet we're called to love people who are like the tax collector, those who are persecuting. Not only are we supposed to love them, will the good of the other, we're supposed to pray on their behalf and intercede for them.
And once again, this is Jesus illuminating a difference in the societal or cultural definition of the word love, because he kind of makes a distinction when he says, if you love those who love you, what reward would you get? That's already being done. Everybody's doing that. But what's going to separate you, what's going to make you holy, what's going to set you apart from everyone else, is loving those who do not love you, or loving those who wish harm on you, loving those who seek to not have your best interests at heart, and actively seek that to hurt you in any way, shape, or form. His command to make the decision to consider their well-being above our own is something that separates us from, it's designed to separate us as followers of Christ from the rest of the world. And when they look at us, they ought to see that these people are different, and they conduct themselves differently in the context of love than the rest of us do.
Amen. Well, that's what I had on this. I don't know if you had any other
love word.
On this love word.
I'm trying to think. Do we have anything else on love? What else needs to be talked about with it, man? I mean, I think we did a
lovely job.
do. I think we did a pretty good job with this, and I mean, I think we discussed, our cultural definition of it, however fragile that is, but ultimately, I think what needs to be flat out stated is this current definition of love that we're operating on is bogus. It doesn't work. It leads to a bunch of heartbreak, a bunch of broken families, a bunch of broken relationships, broken people. The only love that is going to do us any good long term, any good in the here and now, is the biblical definition of love. You can build something with that love. You can build a life with that love. You can build a family with that love. You can build a friendship with that love. You can build a business with that love. But yeah, what we're doing now just doesn't work, and we got to stop this. This idea, even the idea that love is love. What the heck does that even mean? I don't know what that means, and I almost don't want to know what it means. Maybe we should touch that later.
Yeah, I always thought that was kind of a funny slogan. Love is love.
What the heck does it
We are
mean?
defining the word as the word that we're defining.
I don't get it. But anyway, the biblical definition of love is the one that we ought to stake our hat on, stake our claim on, and the one that I think it does more for human flourishing than any other definition we've come up with. Flat out, especially in light of what our purpose is anyway.
Absolutely. Well, we would love it if you would like and share, subscribe, do whatever you got to do to get this out to other people. The podcast is growing. We're trying to share it with more people. We're getting close to 250 right now. We're going to get to 300 before the new year. I am prophesizing in the no, I'm just kidding. It's going to happen. It's going to happen.
I'm really
not the 300, just the prophecy next week.
I was really hoping
it's gonna be a big one.
I was really hoping you didn't do that. I don't.
It's too late.
I really hope. I don't know. Not.
It's too late.
It's funny. My cousin and I were just talking about some of this stuff with like prophecies and YouTube prophets.
Oh, well, he prophesied that I was a prophet. It was great. We will see you next time.
Until next time, I am your co-host Jaylen Thompson,
Dylan Schweitzer,
and as always,
for the kingdom.
We out.